Hello and welcome to the Take a Seat webinar on relationships and attachment during COVID. Our aim today is to develop our skills, knowledge and understanding on working with clients whose relationships have been affected during COVID and how we can explore with attachment theory and how this can be applied to self to maintain self-awareness. We will be exploring relationships and attachment. You will gain a knowledge of understanding using the integrative approach by the end of this webinar. We will develop an awareness of theories and models of self-understanding when exploring relationships. And we will explore 2 case studies on the process used to develop an awareness for the client. We will get an opportunity to discuss our own ideas and explorations of relationship and attachment with your clients during COVID in the Q&A that was going to be set up via Zoom after everybody's completed the webinar. And we will explore and evaluate our own personal relationships and attachment during COVID and our own self-care practices. Please could you have a pen and paper? We're going to have reflections throughout, but also please jot down any questions that you have that you may want to use in the Zoom Q&A. Okay. So just briefly to go over the 2 case studies that I've chosen today. These names have been changed for confidentiality reasons. We're going to call them John and Ella. So throughout this webinar, we're going to explore how was theory attached to these client issues. The theories used during this webinar are person-centered, psychodynamic, drama triangle, transactional analysis and CBT. And if anybody is interested and wants more an in-depth learning experience with these, we are going to be presenting webinars on each of these specific theories within themselves. We're going to look and explore what interventions were used and why they were used and what were the outcomes for these 2 clients. The interventions that we use with these clients are also going to be aware that, are going to be given as part of this webinar for you to download. So we'll start off with Ella. Ella was 16 years old. She presented by exploring and explaining how she spent every day with grandparents and cousins. She would go for breakfast before school. She would then go straight there after school, and she spent all her weekends with her grandparents and reflected on how much her cousin was her mainly most best friend in the world, really. And she hadn't seen her when she presented for therapy for 4 months. Went to being at home with parents and siblings 24/7. So if you look at how much she spent out of the home with breakfast at grandparents, school and weekends, she almost felt like her family were strangers to her. There was no awareness of this either until lockdown happened. School friends that she classed as school friends, because she stated that they mainly only ever really talked about what they were doing in school and didn't really socialise outside of school. She felt isolated, lonely, trapped. There were many arguments due to restrictions and lockdown. Mum and Dad were both furloughed and her brother was at home, and there was a lot of arguments about all being on kind of in each other's space and who wasn't doing things, who was doing things. And also there was a lot of fear and anxiety for the unknown, and also the anxiety of living in every day in a completely different way. John was 44 years old. He was furloughed and working from home along with his wife, and his 6-year-old daughter was at home who was being schooled. Arguments were daily. They again presented with being under each other's feet. John saw himself as the breadwinner, so felt his job was a priority at home, which caused a lot of arguments between him and his wife. She also worked full time, and between them they had to kind of try to come up with a plan really to teach their daughter at the same time. Relationships began to break down with his wife, but also, which brought John ultimately to therapy, was his daughter. The breaking point for John was when his daughter wouldn't come to him one night, as though she was scared, and this left him feeling really anxious and upset. He was suffering from stress, not just with the living arrangements, but also with the amount of work that he was having to fulfill every day, which he was struggling with before lockdown, but hadn't really managed well or looked at how he could relieve that. Anxiety levels were at an all-time high, not just for him, for his wife too, and his daughter was presenting anxious. His biggest fear was the marriage breakdown. The arguments were daily, ongoing throughout the day by the time he came to therapy. So the first theory that I explored with John and Ella was TA. So as an integrative therapist, my foundation is person-centered. So before we looked at this, we built up and began to build a therapeutic relationship. I would say we'd completed, with John and Ella, possibly 3 to 4 sessions of person-centered before we began doing any work, looking at the relationships, responsibility, boundaries, etc. For any integrative therapist, I would say it's fundamental to build that relationship first, using person-centered before we use any other theories or models of self-understanding. So we're going to look at a little bit of what TA is. So TA was developed by psychiatrist Eric Berne. It's a form of modern psychology that examines a person's relationships and interactions. Berne took inspiration from Freud's theories of personality, combining them with his own observations of human interaction in order to develop TA. In theory, TA can be used to address one's interactions and communications with the purpose of establishing and reinforcing the idea that each individual is valuable and has the capacity for positive change and personal growth. This was a massive part of John's theory. Throughout, it kind of come into all parts of his life because he was suffering from issues within his daily work with colleagues. He was having issues at home with his wife and children, and there was also some issues that rose within his family dynamics. Berne developed TA in the 1950s using transaction to describe the fundamental unit of social intercourse, with transactional analysis being the study of social interactions between individuals. Inspired by Freud's theory of personality, primarily his belief that the human psyche is multifaceted and that different components interact to produce a variety of emotions, attitudes, and complex behaviours. Berne developed his own observable ego states of parent, adult, and child, following Freud's proposal of the existence of the id, emotional and rational component, the ego, rational component, and superego, the moral component, as different and unobservable functions of personality. Here's an example of TA. So we have the parent, adult, and child. We have the nurturing parent, which will be keeping safe, calming, nurturing, and supportive, and the controlling parent, which is critical, patronising, and finger pointing. When John presented, he saw his wife as controlling parent, as did Ella. There were also what we became aware of, that there was also aspects from both of those individuals, Ella's mother and John's wife, of nurturing, but they were kind of not being observed through their own ego state. Then we have adult, reasonable, logical, rational, non-threatening. And we have child, adapted child, and free child. What both were in when they presented was adapted child. Both felt bullied, both felt restricted, both felt disempowered, that other people were making them feel a certain way. When we looked at this, and the awareness of nurturing parents was there too, that was a big eye-opener and a big red flag moment for John, because he had become to see his wife as the enemy because he was in adopted child. Any transaction that was happening in adult or nurturing parents, he was using defense mechanisms to not see. Parent role. Parent consists of recordings of external events observed and experienced by a child from birth through approximately the first 5 years of their life. These recordings are not filtered or analysed by the child, they are simply accepted without question. Many of these external events are likely to involve the individual's parents or other adults in parent-link roles, which led Byrne to call this the ego state of the parent. A few examples of external events recorded in this state could be: don't play with matches, remember to say please and thank you, and don't speak to strangers. What came out with Ella was a lot of her parents' teachings from growing up to 5 were from her grandparents, because she spent a lot of time with them as mum and dad worked full time, so they were her caregivers. This brought a lot of awareness for Ella, because she realised and understood why she felt more comfortable to be at grandparents' house as a teenager than she did actually to be at home with her own parents. John also identified with this, and always unconsciously, he said from awareness gain, that he'd always wanted to be the parent he never had. And a lot of his anxieties throughout our therapy were that in his behaviours and his actions with his own daughter, what he was actually performing was his own father, which brought a lot of shame to him, because he didn't feel that his father had the best parent role. Child ego state. Child represents all brain recordings of internal events, so feelings and emotions that are directly linked to the external events observed by the child during the first 5 years of life. Examples of events recorded in this state may include: I feel happy when mum hugs me. I have to be home on time to be good. I feel sad when mum and dad argue. For Ella, her internal events again came from Nan and Grandad. So hers were: I feel happy when Nan and Grandad hug me. I have to be home on time to be good. Again, even when she presented for therapy, was to grandparents' house. And what she became aware of is that even though these were given to her from her parents, unconsciously she only felt them and responded to them from her grandparents. I feel sad when mum and dad argue was really big for her, because what she found now was that she was instigating a lot of those rows in her responses to mum and dad about how uncomfortable and unnatural it felt for her to be at home and then parent her, because she had connected the parent role to her grandparents. And lastly, adult. Adult, the final ego state, is the period in which a child develops a capacity to perceive and understand situations that are different from what is observed, so from parents or what is felt by the child. The adult serves as a data processing centre that utilises information from all 3 ego states in order to arrive at a decision and a destination. One important role of the adult is to validate data which is stored in the parent. I see mum was right, being on time is good and important. It is okay to be sad. When working with TA, I use this handout, which will be available to you for download, for being able for the client to identify their words, tones, gestures, facial expressions when in each of the ego states. So controlling parent, nurturing, adult, free child, and adapted child. What both Ella and John really resonated with was controlling parent and adapted child. What Ella realised was that being at home and how she felt her anxiety and stress and loneliness was constantly making her feel adapted child, and she identified with most of the words, tones, gestures and facial expressions for that ego state. John identified with a lot of the controlling parent. He also identified with adapted child with his younger 6-year-old daughter. He said from awareness gained that he could see that she was coming from free child a lot of the time, and because of his shoulds, musts, need tos, especially around work and how much he should get done in a day, he was finding that he was responding to her in adapted child. That was causing her to not understand, because to her he's always been nurturing parent before lockdown. With his wife, he said they would switch from awareness, and I always use whiteboards for this, and I would draw up the parent, adult, child, and we would draw out the transactions and the cross transactions. What came out from that for John with his wife was one of them was always in controlling parent or adapted child, and a lot of the work I did with John was about how we could get to adult and how he could change his response to allow his wife not to react but to rather respond to an adult. This was really, really powerful with both of these clients, because it gave them the awareness that they are responsible for how they feel, because they are responsible for how they respond. Coupled with this, I also put AERO with this, which is a CBT technique, very same as ABC, and we looked at the event, the response or reaction, and the outcome, which is the feelings. For each of these, you would then do what originally happened, draw a line under it. It would be the same event. We would choose an adult response and then look at how that may change the outcome and the feelings. What we're giving the clients when we do this is the ability to be able to change in the moment and recognize that when something happens, we don't just feel a certain way. We tend to forget the response in the middle. So when using this, it gives you that kind of traffic light moment where you can stop and think. Pretty quickly for John, the arguments began to disappear. He was then able to share this with his wife, and they both began to use it. This was more difficult for Ella because she didn't feel she could approach mum and dad with this and her brother. So she began changing her responses, which ultimately changed the responses of the people who interacted with her. This is a really powerful technique, because when we are in adult, it's very hard for somebody to respond to us continually in control and parent or adapted child. It highlights the behaviour. It does take practice, because it can be really difficult to maintain if that person doesn't come to adult straight away. But this is a very empowering technique for clients, and this worked really, really well for these two clients. Communication using TA. An indication, so speech, gesture, or other non-verbal cues that acknowledge the presence of another person, is called a transactional stimulus. All transactions are initiated by the use of a transactional stimulus. And when two individuals encounter each other and the receiver reacts in a manner related to the transactional stimulus, that individual has performed a transactional response. The key to successful person-to-person communication generally lies in identifying which ego state initiated the transactional stimulus and which ego state provided the transactional response. So to confirm on what I said earlier, when your client chooses adult rather than reacts in a different ego state, they will provide an opportunity for a different response. And sometimes it's not always language and verbal. Eye rolls, communication via body language can also be a massive reaction or a response. And sometimes the loudest response is silent. And sometimes clients pick up on, well, that was walking away, that would be adult. But by not responding when somebody is in adult to us, a massive one for Ella was she would go to her room and choose to ignore the family for the rest of the day, and she thought that was what was best. But what she didn't realise was that that behaviour was adapted child. So working with TA. When working with clients who are experiencing relational issues, exploring their ego state and their responses can bring awareness to how others will respond to them. Exploring ego state, that courage, takes courage, as we are exploring their ability to take responsibility and be accountable for their part in the conflict and their own feelings as a result. I found this to be huge within working with both these clients because responsibility was zero when they both presented. John's marriage breakdown was because of his wife's behaviour. Ella's stress, anxiety and loneliness was because her parents didn't see her, even though she chose to not be seen and hide in her room. Most people feel negatively after communication, not always by how they responded, but how they felt about it. So when we explored critical parent, John would go away feeling really guilty and shameful and also uncomfortable. The uncomfortable kind of, once unpicked, became that he could see himself in the role of his own father. And the shame and guilt was he was responding not how he wanted to. He wasn't identifying all of the feelings that were not just coming from that transaction, but also how he was feeling about work and also lockdown. Most people feel negatively after communication. Again, for Ella, she would hide and hide and hide and feel isolated and felt negatively because her family didn't communicate. However, she was not communicating with them and saw no responsibility with that. When awareness of choosing a response rather than reacting to another is missing, the communication can escalate into a drama triangle. The biggest myth in relational issues is believing silence is no response. No response is a response. And that was big for Ella because she thought she was taking the high ground. What she was doing was putting herself into victim in a drama triangle. So just before we move on to our next part, I'd like you to just make some notes. So TA brought awareness of reactions rather than responses. Can you identify that with any of your client work or self? For me, TA, when I was learning, was life-changing. So the moment that I actually saw it in practice was one day I'm a wheelchair user, and I was pulling up at Asda. I drive, and every time I pulled up in a disabled way, I would have somebody, generally more of an older population, shake their head at me before I'd even turn the engine off. What I found I was doing was, even before I'd gotten the car to go to Asda, I was already riled up and ready for a row. And I kind of was making it happen unawarely. So what I did one day, I pulled up, and instead of opening the window and screaming, "What are you looking at?" blah, 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 and kind of allowing it to ruin my day, because what I would then do is tell everybody what happened, and then they would be, "I can't believe they did that. How could they do that?" And I would put it on Facebook and talk about it in WhatsApp groups and get that confirmation back about how bad that was. When I was training and I was learning this, I pulled up one day and I thought, I wonder what would happen if I responded differently. So it happened, shaking my head, walking past my car, and I ran the window down and said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" And he said, "You shouldn't be parking here. These are for disabled people." So I just said, "I'm just wondering why you feel I'm not disabled." "Well, you haven't put your badge in." So I explained I hadn't even turned the engine off. And I just said, "I am disabled. I'm an above knee amputee. I'm in a wheelchair." And the man was mortified and he apologised. But rather than allow it, I didn't want him to apologise. So I just stated, I said, "Next time, maybe try not to be so judgmental straight away. Give it a little time, because I am aware there are people who park in disabled bays who aren't disabled." What I took from that was, when I left the Asda, left shopping, it didn't change my day like I had before. It didn't sit with me, that anger and frustration. And what I realised through a lot of personal development within my own training was, a lot of my own frustrations with my new disability, I was projecting on to those events and choosing to be an adopted child. It felt amazing to be an adult. And I think sometimes with our clients, it's good to have a story or a relatable story that can explain it. It doesn't have to be your own if you're not comfortable with self-disclosure. But I do think it's good to have an example. From that day on, I felt more empowered and more in control of how I respond and how I feel, and it made this theory all slot together for me. Think about explored feelings attached to reactions. Think about your own, think about what clients have brought. What could be the impact on mood for that awareness of TA? It was huge for John and Ella. Empowerment, again, it was really powerful for John and Ella, but for me, the empowerment changed my life. The responsibility that we have to own our behaviours, our thoughts, our thinking, and the choices that we have, there is a choice with every response, and with every response there is a choice of how we feel. Put your reflections down and we can go through these in the Q&A at a further date. We're going to look at the drama triangle. So when we're in an ego state which isn't adult, we tend to fall into a drama triangle. So the Cartman drama triangle. Manipulation is all too ordinary in relationships. At the core of manipulation is the Cartman drama triangle. This game defines a pattern of yours in relationships with others. The opposite of manipulation is about growth, taking responsibility for how you affect others, and recognizing choices and being willing to risk mistakes. Mental health fills the identity. Manipulation is filling an empty hole inside of you with power and control of others. Imagine a triangle. In one corner, put the persecutor. In another, put the victim. And in the third, rescuer. Each linked to one another in a drama triangle, needing and supporting each other. The drama triangle is everywhere: fairy tales, work, TV, all linked to our personal constructs. People can be on the drama triangle even if they're locked in solitary confinement or alone in outer space. When exploring this with clients, I also offer caution, as the language used with persecutor and victim can trigger emotions. I explain that there are true victims in life, and victims in a drama triangle are very different. There are real persecutors, and persecutor in a drama triangle, again, is very different. And I tend to give my clients some psychoeducation around theories like this. Okay. Whether we know it or not, most of us react to life as victims. Whenever we refuse to take responsibility for ourselves, we are unconsciously choosing to react as victims. This inevitably creates feelings of anger, fear, guilt, or inadequacy, and leaves us feeling betrayed or taken advantage of by others. We can communicate unconsciously to play out our feelings with our communication in our relationships. So, for John, he was the victim, his wife was the persecutor. For Ella, she was the victim, mum and dad were persecutors, nan and granddad were rescuers. For me, I was the victim, the Asda man or woman was the persecutor, and the rescuer was everybody I told who reinforced how bad it was. Not one person told me that maybe I could have responded differently. This is some of the drama triangle comments that I sometimes share with clients. So take one for example, can't you take a joke? Yes, I know I just made you feel 2 inches tall, but why are you calling me out on it? So that shows how when someone can say one thing, they can feel victim in the other. You can have a copy of this with the other worksheets. Drama triangle can be referred to as a shame generator because through it we unconsciously reenact painful life themes that create shame from child or controlling parent ego states. This has the effect of reinforcing old painful beliefs that keep us stuck in a limited version of reality. We can find ourselves expecting other people to change rather than understand that people are responding to us. Dysfunctional interaction in relationship with others or self takes place on the drama triangle. Until we become conscious of these dynamics, we cannot transform them. So what brought John and Ella to therapy was they felt frustrated that nothing was changing without realizing that they were the change. And unless we transform them, we cannot move forward on our journey towards reclaiming emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. Our communication will continue to be a poison within our relationships. No matter where we may start out on the triangle, victim is where we end up. Therefore, no matter what role we're in on the triangle, we're in victimhood. If we're on a triangle, we're living as victims. It's plain and simple. Each person has a primary or most familiar role called the starting gate. This is the place from which we generally enter or get hooked onto the drama triangle. We first learn our starting gate position in our family of origin, although we each have a role with which we most identify. Once we're on the triangle, we automatically rotate through all the positions, going completely around the triangle. So for me, I left the house as victim. I got to Asda as victim. I then persecuted the person who shook their head at me. And then I rescued myself by telling everybody about it. And then I'd repeat that every time that I went to Asda. Drama triangle roles. So starting gate rescuers, SGR, see themselves as helpers and caretakers. The difference between a rescuer and a helpful, caring person is all about the motive. So, for example, all the people who reinforced to me that that person was really bad for shaking their head at me may have thought, well, why did you shout at them? Why didn't you just, speak to them? But never said it to me. They would rather be a yes person than challenge. They need someone to rescue in order to feel vital and important. It's difficult for SGRs to recognise themselves as ever being in the victim position. They're the ones with the answers, all the answers after all, and they tend to be people who are in critical parents. Start and gate persecutors, on the other hand, identify themselves primarily as victims. They are usually in complete denial about their blame and tactics. When it is pointed out to them, they argue that attack is warranted and necessary for self-protection. Both are opposite extremes of victim. Regardless of where we start out on the triangle, all roles eventually end up in victim. It is inevitable. It is the games that people fight. If our clients are responding in control and parent or adapted child, they will be on a drama triangle. For both Ella and John, once we started with TA and looked at the roles and ego states and transactions that they were making, drama triangle really resonated with both of them, because I would use a whiteboard, and as we did the drama triangle roles and they would identify it, I would draw it up next to the triangle and show the ego states and the transactions that brought them to that. Start and gate positions on the drama triangle is not only where we most often enter on the triangle, it is also the roles through which we define ourselves. It becomes a strong part of our identity, playing a pivotal part in our relationships. For me, I was the victim in my parking nightmare, and what I was falling into unconsciously was a victim in my identity. And that was something I never wanted to be. So for me, TA was life transforming that way. And I think adult gave me the empowerment to go on and do much, much more than I ever thought I was capable of in a wheelchair. Each start and gate position has its own particular way of seeing and reacting to the world. This is our perception of our world derived from core beliefs and constructs. We all have unconscious feelings that we respond and act out. These become our life themes that predispose us towards the unconscious selection of a particular start and gate. Once work is done on the drama triangle with clients and we leave and step out of a drama triangle, our start and gates become void. Start and gate rescuers may not admit to being in the victim role. An SGR in the victim role becomes a martyr, complaining very loudly, "Why do I always have to give people lips everywhere?" without realizing that they're giving people lips everywhere. "After all I've done to you, this is the thanks I get." They would be acting out adapted child. "I make all the effort and they do not appreciate me." Our start and gate entrance on the drama triangle will depend on our perception of who we are and how we are feeling. When exploring the client's awareness of their own feelings, and that can be perceived and responded to, but another can bring great insight. It can become empowering for the client to become aware they can control how they respond and feel when communicating in relationships. For John, "All I've done for you and I make all the effort," etc., they were huge for him because that is how he felt. So how dare his wife criticize what he's not doing without realizing that he wasn't actually doing them. He was doing them because he felt he should be doing them. Persecutor. Not many clients like to admit to this role, understandably. Start and gate persecutor sees themselves as victims in need of protection. Unconsciously, this was where Ella was. Because she spent very little time at home, when she was there because she felt uncomfortable. She felt she needed protection. This is how they can so easily justify their vengeful behaviour. Vengeful is quite a harsh word, but for Ella, her vengeful behaviour was silence. She felt she was persecuting them, making them suffer for how they made her feel. They asked for it and they got what they deserved. So she was very angry with her parents because they didn't make an effort with her. So why should she make an effort with them? And they were very uncomfortable with their silences. It's their own fault. They shouldn't have said that. They're just selfish, so why should I bother? I'm not speaking to them. Their core belief may be the world is dangerous, people can't be trusted, so I need to get to hurt them before they hurt me. That's just for some clients, but the general consensus for starting gate persecutors is they are in victim, but they're angry victims. This attitude sets them up to think that they must strike out in order to defend against inevitable attack. Look after number one. John recognised this with his work colleagues. This ego state is again critical parent or adapted child and can be destructive in any relationship. Like the other roles, SGP is shame-based. This role is most often taken on by someone who received overt mental or physical abuse during childhood. This is not the case for Ella, but it was for John. As a result, they are often secretly seething inside from the shame-based wrath that ends up running their lives. SGPs, for survival's sake, repress deep-seated feelings of worthlessness. They hide their pain behind a facade of indignant wrath and uncaring detachment. John didn't recognise his detachment until his marriage was nearly over. The massive smack in the face, as he said it, was his daughter not wanting to come to him. And he felt that detachment in that moment and recognised that that detachment was one that he had recognised with his own father. SGPs tend to adopt an attitude that says, the world is hard and mean, only the ruthless survive. I'll be one of those. And that was exactly John's mentality. They protect themselves using authoritarian, controlling, sometimes punishing behaviours. For Ella, not so much authoritarian or controlling, but a punishing behaviour was to dismiss herself from them, from her parents, knowing it was painful for them. Ironically, a main exit way off the triangle is through the persecutor position. This does not mean we become persecutors. It does mean, however, that once we decide to get off the triangle, there is most likely will be those who see us as persecutors. How can you do this to me? Choosing to leave a drama triangle means choosing to respond in adult, and unfortunately, not everybody is comfortable. For Ella and John, they were comfortable, and it massively changed their relationships, with Ella for her parents and for John for his wife and daughter. However, I have had clients in the past who have partners or work colleagues, etc., who do not choose to come off the drama triangle. They don't want to respond in adults, and unfortunately, that will choose a relationship. It will force a relationship breakdown. Once we decide to take self-responsibility and tell our truth, those on the triangle are likely to accuse us of victimising them. How dare you refuse to take care of me, a victim might cry. Or, what do you mean you don't need my help? A primary enabler storms when their victim decides to become accountable and choose an adult response. In other words, to escape the victim grid, we must be willing to be perceived as the bad guy. This doesn't make it so, but we are willing to sit with the discomfort of being perceived as such. choose an adult ego state when those around us are operating in parent or child, and refuse to meet us in the adult ego state can become toxic. Our clients may become tired and exhausted, realizing that they do not want to work so hard in relationship. This is just some of the sayings that we may hear in victim. Why does this always happen to me? I can't trust anybody. Nobody will listen. These are all what we may pick up in a presenting client to identify that we may need to do some work around drama triangle and ego states. Starting gate victim. The role of starting gate victim is also a shadow aspect. It is the wounded shadow of our inner child, the part of us that is innocent, vulnerable, and needy. This child self does need support on occasion. That's natural. It's only when we become convinced that we can't take care of ourselves that we move into victim. Believing that we are frail, powerless, or defective keeps us needing rescue. This regulates us to a lifetime of crippling dependency on our primary relationships. A starting gate victim has accepted a definition of themselves that says they are intrinsically damaged and incapable. Starting gate victims project an attitude of being weak, fragile, or not smart enough. Basically, I can't do it myself. Their greatest fear is that they won't make it. That anxiety forces them to always be on the lookout for someone stronger and more capable to take care of them. They seek a controlling or nurturing parent. Our clients may be in either role. This again is a worksheet that I used both with Ella and John, and we looked at different character foundations. So we looked at the inner parent, the inner child, and we looked at adults. And by consciously choosing parts of these that we would like to be as part of our character, gave that empowerment of choosing a response a more deeper foundation. So John, for example, identified with bossy, demanding, dominant, fault-finding, all of them really. And what he wanted to work on was being more affectionate, considerate, forgiving. He was able to do this by looking at his ego state of adult in the moment and choosing nurturing over critical. The same for Ella. She identified with a lot of adapted, anxious, arguing, arrogant, awkward, defensive. And what she wanted was more imaginative, excitable, energetic, but she also wanted some of the nurturing parent with her mum and dad. So she began in adult to start praising, be more helpful and kind. What this then gave them by the end of their therapy was a lot of the adult contributions, which were realistic, organised, fair-minded, clear-headed, more reasonable. These were two of the activities that I worked with them with. So we used this mood tracker. For John, he wrote for each of the numbers as a day of the month, and he wrote in his. Ella was very creative, and she chose to remake this and colour it in, and she used lots of different, paints and crayons, and she would just kind of use this to explore herself with colour. So she attached a colour to each feeling. So we used this, and what this allowed us to do after a month was identify which moods for them was attached to which ego state. So for example, for excited, Ella had chose yellow, and she put that as free child. Average, she saw as adult. Overwhelmed and stressed, she put as critical parent. This is another one that you can use as well. Same type of technique, but I tend to choose depending on the client. This is the opposite of the drama triangle, and this is where we want to get with clients. So victim is vulnerable, and it's okay to not be okay. Nurturing is the rescuer in us, gives help when asked rather than gives help when someone hasn't asked, cares, understands, doesn't need to be needed by other people, but likes to be needed if they want to choose it. Assertive is the persecutor, knows own feelings, needs and wants. The persecutor role is very subjective, so we can be a persecutor in someone's drama triangle without even knowing we're in the drama triangle. And that might just be because we said no. Because we were adults in our own and we said no when we meant no rather than say yes when we meant no. So assertiveness would cover that. Working with TA. So when exploring TA, when working with clients having relationship or communication issues, can bring immense self-awareness and empowerment. We can forget that we have the power to control how we feel, how we respond and how we behave. And TA work kind of brings all that, coupled with drama triangle and hero, brings all that to the forefront and gives our clients immense empowerment in how they feel and how they respond. Using whiteboard work and worksheets can empower your client to self-reflect and see visually the games being played. Personally, as an integrative therapist, I use whiteboards with every client. Worksheets we tend to do both on the whiteboard while the client is filling it out, and I think it just brings everything into the room for us to explore. And what you may find when doing this, I've many a time drew up a triangle and the parent, adult, child, and as we're exploring it, I will notice the client's eyes drifting towards the whiteboard. And in that moment when I explore that, what they're seeing and feeling right now, it tends to be, that's me, and that's why this is happening. So I use whiteboard work with most clients in most sessions for that reason. Exploring feelings and experiences or memories when looking at ego states can bring change and self-awareness. So I did that with John more so than Ella, because a lot of his feelings and experiences and memories come from his parenting that he hadn't connected to his father's parenting, and the rules around parenting that he didn't, family constructs that he didn't want to hold anymore. He wanted to change his view of how parents should be. The outcome can bring relief to any dysfunctional relationship in the client's life. And for John mostly, he kind of overspilled it into his work, his family, his larger family, his siblings and his own mum and dad. So this changed a lot of his relationships, not just with his wife and child. Choosing an ego state will support your client from entering the drama triangle or attracting people into their life who only serve them negatively in response to them. So also when clients have got this awareness, they will tend to not, we're in start and gate victim, we will tend to not attract rescuers. Maybe we will attract more a caring person whose motives aren't about just telling us what we want to hear. And what rescuers tend to come from their own victimhood too. Building new relationships for both of these clients, we looked at some connecting relationships habits. So we looked at the support, encouraging, listening, accepting, trust, respecting, and negotiating differences. And John did a lot of work on this and how he can change once the awareness for his wife too. And this for Ella was huge because these were connecting relationship habits that she'd never built with her parents, and herself and her parents were not aware of this. Exploring relationships. The opposite of connecting relationship habits is the 7 disconnecting habits, which are based on external control. These habits lead to the breakdown of relationships. Being disconnected can lead to many of the problems facing human beings. Individuals use the 7 disconnecting habits to control people. Utilizing these habits usually leads to misunderstandings and resentment. The 7 disconnecting habits are criticizing, blaming, complaining, nagging, threatening, punishing, bribing, rewarding to control. As you will notice, both clients, John and Ella, had all of these when they presented for therapy. But we're blaming all of these on the other people. Their ego states were linked. We did this on whiteboard work, which ego state was criticizing, blaming, complaining, etc. Then we also looked at how this played out in a drama triangle. They worked really, really hard on changing these disconnecting habits to the connecting habits on the previous slide. The power of choice. When we unconsciously make choices from relationship, connecting bad habits and disconnecting habits. We strive to meet our 5 basic needs, but may feel confused as to why our choices become detrimental to our well-being. We can then live with regret, shame, guilt, and a sense of failure. A lot of our disconnecting habits also can be explored in therapy by exploring, have we learned them? Have we learned that that's how we should be? Are they our personal constructs? Are they learned behaviours? Are they core beliefs? We then can choose consciously or unconsciously to blame self or others. Accountability is crucial here, as no matter what the choice, we played a part in it. If we do not recognise this at any level, we can fail to move on from it. No choice is a choice. The outcome for John and Ella. Both clients gained awareness of their reactions, that their reactions controlled their feelings. They gained accountability, they took responsibility, and they took massive steps in practicing outside of the therapy sessions, choosing their ego state to stay out of a conscious drama triangle. They used transparency in adults to stay out of the drama triangle in their relationships with others. Became empowered, choosing behaviours that reflected their true feelings. For John, I think the empowerment took him to another step where he actually changed the father that he was to the father that he wanted to be and the husband that he wanted to be. Self-esteem became healthier for both clients because there was no internal conflict. They were both becoming their true selves. Relationships became stronger and connection deepened. They became aware of their conditions of worth that no longer served them well. They communicated feeling words openly, especially for Ella. She really struggled with naming feelings, so we used the feelings wheel in most sessions. And they took responsibility for their own thoughts, thinking, and behaviours. Recognising blame as a defence mechanism. If you've had any questions during today's webinar, I'd just like you to jot them down and we can include them in the Q&A Zoom session that we're going to have at a later date. Also, take time to really reflect on today's theory, especially the TA coupled and integrated with drama triangle, and think about how you could use it in your client work, but also think about how you can use it in your own relationships or your own transactions with other people. Make some notes and we can have a discussion. Self-reflection part of the webinar. How has COVID or lockdown impacted your relationships and attachments, and how have you utilised self-care? If you could make some notes on this, and I think it would be really interesting for us all to get together once this webinar has been watched, for us to discuss You know, have we used those theories with our awareness of them? Has there been times during lockdown that we too haven't been able to use these theories? I know for me that has been the case, and as therapists, you know, it's an ongoing process to try to utilize self-care, but we're only human and we also have some of the same issues that our clients present with. And lockdown's been difficult for everybody. So it'd be interesting to see how and what people have used for self-care during this time. Thank you for taking part today. And any questions, just let me know.